Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where I am going through my top 10 games for every system I have owned. On to one of the big hitters now with the Super Nintendo. I got my SNES for Christmas in the mid-90s and loved the hell out of it. Before I got mine, I would play my friend Raymond's one, and I couldn't believe the leap from my Master System to this. As always with the list, keep in mind that this is my top 10. I'm not saying these are the best games on the system, but growing up, I only got a few games every year, so had a modest selection, and nope, I never had Secret of Mana, any Final Fantasy games, Castlevania 4, Contra, or even Zelda, so you won't see any of them here, I'm afraid. But anyway, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Let's start with an obvious one. It's Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World. You don't really need me to tell you why this is one of my favourite SNES games. It's an awesome cartridge that I was actually given while in school by my friend, because back then we didn't know the value of anything. It comes with the awesome Super Mario World, as well as remakes of the original Mario trilogy from the NES, and on top of that you get the Lost Worlds, which is technically Mario 2 but the Japanese version. You all know the story there. If somehow you don't know about these games, well, they're some of the best platform games on the 8 and 16-bit era, and arguably still some of the best ones today. In all but one of them, you play as Mario, or Luigi if you're player 2, and you have to rescue Princess Peach, or Toadstool, depending on what Nintendo felt like at the time, from the evil King Koopa, or Bowser. The ones that you don't do that in is Super Mario Bros. 2, which is a different style of game where Mario is dreaming and you've got to rescue Subcom from evil monsters. All the games are fantastic platformers though, where they combined hundreds of levels packed with enemies, crazy power-ups, hidden worlds and more. You really can't go wrong with any of the games in this bundle, and this version lets you save your progress in each of the games separately, so you don't have to start from the beginning every time like you normally would, well, on the NES ones anyway. The remakes of the original games are also great. They've been given a proper 16-bit makeover with totally new graphics and sound, and thankfully they made sure that the controls were just as good and responsive as before, and they are a joy to play. Now, let's face it, I don't need to say any more about this one. It's Mario, it's great, you probably already have it. Good. Donkey Kong Country, made by Rare, came out in 1994. This 2D platform game saw the triumphant return of DK. The evil King K. Rool has turned up on your island, and while you're sleeping, him and his henchmen stole all of your bananas. This is not something DK is going to stand for, so he sets off to collect the bananas and kick the K-Rap out of K. Rool. He's not alone though, as your little mate Diddy Kong, who was actually supposed to be standing guard but was ambushed by the bad guys and shoved in a barrel, hence why you find him in a barrel, joins you on your adventure. Both characters control really well. In fact, the controls are damn near perfect. You can run, jump, climb, swing and roll or cartwheel with ease. To attack, you jump on most enemies, but not all of them, and you have the aforementioned roll or cartwheel, which can also be used to kill enemies. Of course, as it's a Donkey Kong game, there are barrels all over the place as well, and you can throw these at bad guys, and some even go through multiple enemies. You can switch between DK and Diddy at any point when you have them both, and they do play slightly differently to one another. Here, Donkey Kong is a tiny bit slower than Diddy and can't jump as high, but his massive bulk means that he can jump on some enemies to kill them that Diddy would just bounce off. If you do take a hit, the character falls off the screen and has to be found in a barrel to get them back. Take a hit when you've got just one character and you'll lose a life. Personally, I always prefer playing as Donkey Kong, as the speed and jumping isn't really noticeable, and you never need a particular character for a particular section. Also, Donkey Kong can throw barrels much further than Diddy, which is very useful most of the time. The levels are littered with enemies, from crocodile bastards called Kremlins, to a whole range of other wildlife that wants to stop you getting your bananas back. Not all of them are evil though, and you'll find some animals helpers that are experienced killing machines, like Rambi the rhino, and the frog guy whose name I can't remember. Is it Winky? Or there's my favourite, Ongard the swordfish, who comes in very handy in the swimming levels. And speaking of levels, there's a ton of them, and they're all very varied. You've got standard platforming levels, swimming levels, the famous minecart stages where you're on rails and essentially have to navigate an obstacle course, as well as levels where you have to fire yourself through dangerous maze of barrels. The game does an amazing job of keeping things fresh. Also, the levels are packed with hidden bonus areas where you can win extra lives or bananas. During the regular stage, there's a ton of bananas to collect as well, and of course 100 gives you an extra life. Something we have to mention are the graphics, which still look amazing today. This is one of, if not the first game on the SNES to use pre-rendered graphics, and it all looks gorgeous with amazing animation. The amount of detail on just about everything is staggering, and it's really hard to find fault with it. And on par with the graphics is the music, which is one of the best 16-bit soundtracks ever if you ask me. The Underwelter stage music in particular is just awesome, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I've listened to the soundtrack outside of the game more than once. To top it all off, you can even play it in 2-player co-op. The only real shame I find with the game is that a lot of the bosses are a bit of a letdown. They're all very easy, and the only one that gave me any problems was K. Rool himself, but that still only took me maybe 3 or 4 lives before I figured out the pattern. The others I actually beat my first time, and they even get repeated a few times throughout the game with slightly different attack patterns. Now I could bang on about this game more, but we've got a few more games to look at, and all you really need to know is that this is an essential game if you own a SNES. Kid Klown in Crazy Chase is a game that I actually got bundled with my SNES along with Super Metroid and Wario's Woods, and surprisingly at first I played this more than I played Super Metroid. It's a really cool isometric platform game when you are Kid Klown, with a K, and you have to rescue the princess who's been kidnapped by the evil Blackjack. What's more, Blackjack has set up a series of bombs across the land, so you have to follow the bomb's really long fuse and get rid of the bomb before it explodes. I'm going to say bomb a lot, aren't I? Of course, to do this you have to collect the 4 card suit icons from floating balloons, otherwise how the hell are you meant to kick a bomb? The levels are all a good length and you'll be running through forests, cities, caves, snowy mountains and volcanoes. You're always running towards the screen and the track is littered with all kinds of crazy hazards for you to avoid. What's great is that almost every hazard has its own animation if you hit it, and the game has some really cool slapstick comedy moments of you being blown up or getting soaked by a hydrant, run over by a car, something like that. You take damage and you can lose a life this way, but a lot of the time the obstacles are just there to slow you down as you're racing the lit fuse, which you'll see go past you if you take too long, making some of the levels pretty hectic. If you make it to the end of the stage without getting all 4 card suit icons though, you have to go all the way back to the start, which is annoying. It's all very well done though. The graphics and animation are excellent here, and everything has a lot of personality. It's also one of those characters who says a lot through expression without needing to talk or have annoying tood. There are hidden bonus levels as well, which are pretty tough to find, and completing them gives you extra health, speed and jump bonuses for a short time. This is a pretty short game though, and it can be beaten fairly easily in less than half an hour. Of course, this is one of those games that you'll want to play through a second time where the difficulty is ramped up, and this is when you get the proper ending, unless you get to unlock the real cage at the end of the game. Unfortunately, there's no save or password, which I guess isn't really that big of a problem as the game's only about 20 minutes long, but it doesn't feel like a chore to play through. I really enjoy this game. It could be nostalgia talking, but it is a fun game that I highly recommend checking out. F-Zero is from Nintendo. This is a very early game for the system and one that I got fairly soon after getting my SNES back in the 90s, and now I like it just as much as I did back then. You only get 4 characters to choose from, but of course each of their vehicles controls very differently and you really notice the difference between them. You get a few cups, each with their own selection of tracks, and they start off quite easy but soon turn into narrow tracks littered with jumps and hazards for you to crash into or fall off of. The game is really fast as well, but thankfully the controls are spot on, and once you get used to how it works you'll be speeding around corners. This was one of the first games, if not the first game, that I played that uses a drift mechanic. By pressing L or R you can do subtle drifts to the left or right. These are really handy when you're on the long straights to keep yourself in the centre of the track, and you also get to use the drift to take sharp corners, and you'll need to master this if you want to get anywhere in the game. You also get a boost. There's 3 per race, so you'll need to learn the best place and time to use them, as you can easily send yourself flying off into the rails, and if you take too much damage, you'll explode. Equally, you can fall off the track in some areas, and if you do, you'll need to restart the race. You get a few continues, and if you're new to the game, you're gonna need them. But it's such a fun game with awesome graphics, an iconic soundtrack, and some of the best racing action on the Super Nintendo. Unfortunately, it is only single player, and I would have loved a few more characters, but other than that, this is definitely a must-own. Boogerman, a pick-and-flick adventure, is one that some of you might not have played. It's a 2D action platform game where you play as a janitor who's also the superhero Boogerman. He's cleaning a massive toilet one day that is also a portal to Dimension Excrement, where the evil millionaire Snotty Ragsdale is appearing and stealing some materials that he needs to take over both dimensions. So Boogerman gets his green garbs on and flushes himself into Dimension Excrement to put a stop to it. And yes, that's really the story. The gameplay is your classic 2D action. There's more than 20 levels to explore, all packed with all sorts of disgusting enemies for you to deal with. Your mission on each level is just to get to the end, but it isn't always that easy as the levels are quite large and go all over the place. It's rarely just a case of going from left to right. As mentioned, there are loads of enemies. These come mostly in the forms of various snot monsters. Some have weapons that they'll use to attack you, some fly, some just jump at you. They can be a pain in the ass though, even though most of them only take one hit to defeat. Thankfully, Boogerman has a pretty good arsenal, emphasis on the arse. To kill enemies, you either jump on their heads. This works well for most of them, but can be tricky on the smaller ones. But you can also pick and flick your boogers at enemies. This doesn't have a great range, but it still kills most things in one go. Then you've got your various holes. You can do a massive burp that will rip through enemies, or you can just rip through enemies with your arse by crouching and pressing A. The longer you hold the button for both gas attacks, the bigger and longer it goes on for, dealing massive damage. It's pretty good against bosses. And yes, this game is very immature, so might not be for everyone. In the levels you get power-ups, there's capes which let you take a few hits before dying, milk which makes you hock a loogie rather than flicking boogers, and there's a chili that, as you can imagine, makes your butt bombs even more potent. You can even use your arse as a jetpack when you've got the chili. These are active until you take a hit. You also find pus balls that you can jump on and plungers to pick up. If you've got enough by the end of the level, you get an extra life. It's worth mentioning that the game has a few bosses, and they're all really bloody hard to beat. You can learn their patterns, which is easier said than done, and they take a ton of hits to take down, but they're not impossible. Thankfully, you do get passwords here, and there's always one before a boss fight, so that's fair. Graphics wise, the game is great. It's got loads of details and some super smooth animation. My only gripe is that the sprites are massive, so it can be easy to take a hit from something you don't see appear on the screen in time. But still, this is a really fun, challenging platform game that, if you can handle some immature humour, is actually a solid game. The Super Nintendo had some of the best fighting games around, and actually the real reason I wanted a SNES was Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which I first played at my friend Raymond's house and was blown away by it. This is another game that doesn't really need any introduction, but it's a one-on-one fighting game where you get to choose from a selection of iconic figures, each with their own fighting styles and special moves, but you know that already. I remember buying this one in the local supermarket, but it wasn't the normal version. It came in a silver tin and it had the game, manual and a pin badge. Sadly, this all was years ago, and I probably don't have any of those bits anymore. But I was hooked on the game from the first time I played it, which was actually in the arcade. The characters were massive and detailed, and the selection of moves was crazy. Seeing characters like Ryu, Dhalsim, Blanka and Chun-Li really made it stand out, and the fact that it was so easy to pick up and play definitely helped. I spent hours in my bedroom playing this game on the SNES with the manual on my lap so I could learn how to throw fireballs and do spinning bird kicks, and once it clicked, that was it. I've always been a Street Fighter kind of guy since then, and no amount of Tekken, Mortal Kombat or Soul Calibur has ever come close to this in my mind. I know a lot of people out there have a favourite character that they stick to, but I always love trying them all out and learning their moves. Of course, if you beat the arcade mode, you do get a cutscene for each character, which really makes it worth trying them all out. The graphics and animation are still great, and the colours really pop. The controls are even still spot on, being fast and responsive, and the special moves are easy to pull off. I did find that going back to this version again, that the AI for some characters is really cheap and annoying, with them blocking everything, countering things that they shouldn't be able to, and doing the classic arcade trope of being able to pull off moves that require you to hold a direction or a button for a few seconds instantly. This makes Guile a pain in the ass to fight on the higher difficulties, as no matter what you do, he instantly does a sonic boom or flash kick, even though you have to charge them for 2 seconds normally. It's cheap, but you learn to fight against it. Multiplayer is where the game really shines though, and is always fun with a friend. You can spend hours duking it out with people. And the legacy still stands, as there are still remakes, remasters and ports of this game being released today. The other fighting game I loved on the SNES and played the hell out of was Killer Instincts from Rare. It's another one-on-one fighting game where you have a similarly random group of fighters, but here you've got assassins, boxers, dinosaurs, werewolves, flame men, robots and even a skeleton. Yeah, there's a story here, but who really cares? The game certainly doesn't, as there's little to no mention of it anywhere in the game. You do get a few bits at the end of arcade mode on the higher difficulties, but that's not really why you're playing. You're playing for the fast-paced, combo-crazy combat, and boy is it still fun to play. The real focus here is absolutely on putting together massive combos, which you have to learn. You can't just string together random attacks. The combos are specific combinations of special moves and range from 3-hit combos right the way up to 60-hit ultra combos that finish your opponent off. Because of this, Killer Instinct isn't quite as pick up and play as games like Street Fighter, and you will have to pick a character and learn their moves and combos before moving on to another one. You can still play the game perfectly well without learning the combos, but you'll get your ass destroyed in the higher difficulties. In fact, the game has a few mechanics that really make it more complex than other fighters of the time, as far as I played anyway. Like doing combo breakers to save your ass if your opponent is about to unleash one on you. These are hard to pull off, but well worth learning. You also have Mortal Kombat style finishing moves, though I do have to say that these are a lot tamer and rarely more than stabbing or shooting someone, or doing a massive regular attack. Though, if you're my favourite character, Orchid, the sexy woman, she finishes people off by showing them her boobs and they have a heart attack. I can't believe Nintendo let that in the game. But no, you don't get to see them. Graphically, the game is excellent, with some really cool pre-rendered sprites, as this came out not long after Donkey Kong Country, but the animation is smooth and fluid, and the controls are great. All the characters even have a distinct design, and I do think they hold up reasonably well today, though I do know that not everyone's a fan of pre-rendered stuff. The music is also excellent, and I remember getting the Killer Cuts CD with my copy of Killer Instinct. Actually, here's a memory I just had. I actually went to town with my nan in the morning and bought Spider-Man Maximum Carnage, but I completed it before lunchtime, so we went back into town and I exchanged it for this, and I'm glad I did. I still like firing this one up to have a playthrough. Since the internet, it's much more accessible, and I highly recommend just looking up a moves list for the characters so you can get stuck straight in. It's definitely worth it. Super Smash TV is one of the first games I played on the SNES, and yep, it was at my friend Raymond's house. Wonder what he's doing these days. I hope he's doing well. This is a port of the arcade game, which is basically The Running Man. You're a contestant in a futuristic TV show called Smash TV, and the premise is simple. You have a gun, and you go from room to room where you just have to survive an onslaught of enemies who enter from 4 doors, one on each wall. Once you've killed everyone, you move on to the next room. Sometimes you've got a choice as to which room you go to, sometimes there's only one way to go. Eventually you'll come up against a massive boss, and these guys are tough and take a hell of a lot of firepower to put down. Controlling the game is really great. You move with the D-pad and use the 4 face buttons to shoot in any direction. You can even do diagonals. This works incredibly well and gives you the flexibility you need to run in one direction while shooting in the other one. And you'll need it, as there are literally hundreds of enemies on each level, and they all do different things. Some walk at you and attack you, some shoot, some explode, some fire shrapnel, some bounce around, and some just run everywhere erratically. Thankfully, you get a ton of power-ups to help you out. There's plenty of new weapons to collect as well, like rockets that pass through enemies so you can take out loads in one shot, a grenade gun that has a crap range but a decent spread if it's up close, and it is powerful. Then there's the spread shot, and much like any game with a spread shot, that's the one you want most of the time. There's even a mortar-like gun that only appears on boss fights. And all of these are pretty handy, but they do have ammo, so you have to need to try to be accurate, so don't go wasting them. You can also get boots to make you faster, a shield for invincibility, extra lives, and even a little drone thing that flies around you and shoots when you do, with whatever weapon you have. This lasts until an enemy touches it, but it's very handy. You can also collect hundreds of presents. These come in the form of very exciting 90s things like colour TVs, VCRs, toasters, and so on. These just give you points, so can be largely ignored, and sometimes it is best to ignore them as they might spawn over one of the deadly mines that's on the level, and if you touch it, you'll blow up. And you do only get one hit before you die here, unless you've got an invincibility power-up of course. There are a few lives and a few continues though. It's a bloody hard game, but one that is still beatable. I remember the first time I beat the first boss, thinking that was the end of the game, only to find out that there was dozens more levels to play through. You won't be getting through this one quickly. But it's so damn fun and addictive that you'll definitely be coming back to try again and again. Here is Wario's Woods. It's a puzzle game which surprises even me, and Wario is barely anywhere to be seen. You play as Toad, and for the most part the aim of the game here is to play against other strange characters and clear your board of monsters before they do. It's a race. So what happens is you have a coloured monster on your side of the board. Well, actually you have a variety of coloured monsters. Also, there's a fairy at the top of the board that will constantly drop down bombs every few seconds. You've got to match 2 or more of the coloured monsters with the same coloured bomb to blow them up. Get rid of all your monsters before the other person and you win. There are plenty of variables though. For starters, the way it works is Toad can pick up and place any monsters or bombs. You can walk anywhere too, even straight up the sides of monster columns, but if you're carrying something, then you can't do that. You either have to pick up individual things, or if there's space, you can pick up an entire column and move it around. Toad can also either place things one space ahead, or directly below you. You need to make matches in a straight line, either up, down or diagonally. Making combos is really what you want to do though, as for every combo you make, a column of monsters will appear on your opponent's side, all the way to the top of the screen, which can really screw them up. If you get 4 monsters in a row, then your opponent's roof, which is a thwomp by the way, will get lower, but by getting 4 themselves it will raise up again. Getting 5 or more in a row will create a diamond, which if you use it in a match will then get rid of all monsters of that colour. You can also make eggs appear if you create a match in 2 directions at once, like an L shape for example. These eggs will hatch and create a row of monsters that appear at the top of the screen. There's really a lot to remember. Pressing L or R lets you kick things in that direction and can be done while carrying things as well. So yeah, while it seems simple at first, you soon realise there's quite a lot to it. You battle other characters and it's the first of 3 rounds that wins. Then you move on to the next character and they get harder each time, and boy do they get hard. In fact, I've never actually managed to beat this game. I'm assuming Wario is the last boss, but I don't know if I'll ever actually find out. There's also a few other modes, like puzzle mode where you have a limited number of bombs to clear a screen. Then of course there's a 2-player versus, which is really fun to play. Graphics wise, it's what you'd expect from a puzzle game. It's nothing too special, but it does the job. The controls can take a bit to get used to. They are deliberately stiff as you sort of move in blocks, but this does make it easier to place things in the right place. This is one of those puzzle games that's easy to pick up and play, but really takes a lot of practice to master. Loads of fun though, and highly recommended. And finally, for what is probably my favourite Super Nintendo game, and quite possibly my favourite game of all time, here is Super Metroid. Oh boy, this game is just incredible, and yep, it was one that came with my Super Nintendo on that fateful Christmas day, along with Wario's Woods and Kid Klown. As mentioned, at first this is probably the game that I played the least, for the first few days anyway. The other 2 games were more what I was used to, games that you could pick up and play for 20 minutes and get a fair bit done. I remember playing this one for the first time for around half an hour and barely scratching the surface. Keep in mind that at this point my only experience with the SNES were games like Street Fighter 2, Smash TV and Mortal Kombat 2, which I played at Raymond's house. Super Metroid was really like nothing else I'd played. I was never into RPGs and I never had a Zelda game at this point, so the thought of a huge sprawling adventure like this was new to me. But then I sat down and played it properly and I could not put it down. You are Samus Aran, a bounty hunter who has put a stop to the Metroid menace until you get a distress call from a planet where you've dropped off the last Metroid in captivity. The start of the game sees you going back to this planet and everyone is dead. You explore the lab and find the last Metroid still in its glass jar, but it's being taken by a space dragon, Ridley. You have a fight and then the base starts to explode and you've got to escape. It's all just so bloody epic within the first few minutes, and I couldn't believe this was a video game at the time. So yeah, you go to planet Zebes or Zebes, I don't know how you say that, to get the Metroid back from the evil Mother Brain who's orchestrated the whole thing, before the Metroids, which are brain-sucking space jellyfish by the way, can reproduce and fuck shit up. We all know the term Metroidvania by now, and this is where it all came from. Well, I guess technically the NES game, but that one sucks. Deal with it. The whole thing here is that you have to explore a massive open world while collecting new weapons, power-ups and items that will let you go back to old areas to unlock doors or reach new parts of the area that you couldn't previously get to. There's just so much to do here and it can be quite overwhelming at first. Samus can run, jump, wall jump and shoot, but as you play you get speed boosts, jump boots, grappling hooks, x-ray vision and even an awesome spin attack that lets you jump forever. You also get upgrades to your weapons like missiles, super missiles, bombs, wave beams, freeze rays, all sorts. Oh, and how can I forget the awesome morph ball that lets you turn into a tiny ball so you can get through small gaps. These powers and abilities are all needed to explore and to unlock the doors of various different colours. The game does tell you a few things, but really there's a bare minimum in telling you where to go next or what you need to do. But you've got a map that's very easy to read and you'll be able to see where you have and haven't been yet. Though there are definitely times where you'll be running around lost back and forth with absolutely no idea what the hell you need to do. But that's kind of the point with this game. It's all about being alone on an alien planet and it's got a really good atmosphere, especially for a 16-bit game. There's a ton of enemies all over the place and each part of the world has its own variety. As you go deeper into the planet, the world and enemies become more armour-like and fiery, and the higher up is more plant-based. It's really cool how it's all done. And the bosses here are just incredible. They're massive beasts that can take a hell of a beating, but often there's secret ways that you can kill them quickly. The game is just full of little details and secrets as well, and it's impossible to go over everything, but half the fun is exploring and discovering it. As you can see, the game looks great with amazing animation and so much detail everywhere, and I've got to say the final boss is one that will always stick with me, and it's still one of the most epic boss battles that I've ever played. Anyway, I've probably talked too much about this one already, so I'm going to stop there. Just know that this is an almost perfect game in my opinion, and everyone should play it, no matter how you play it. So there you go, my top 10 SNES games in no particular order. I know a lot of you will be mad that I didn't include your favourites, but the chances are that I just didn't have them growing up. So while I might love A Link to the Past, it's not one that I tend to go back to like I do these games. Doesn't mean I don't love it though. Anyway, as always, shout at me in the comments after you've pressed that subscribe button, of course. And now, what's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.